allows the U.S. to impose more sanctions on Pyongyang, which it has just done. In a TV interview on Wednesday, a spokesman for the DPRK's foreign ministry called Trump's decision disgraceful and a grave provocation and aggressive violation. The spokesman denied that Pyongyang is engaged in any form of terrorism.
The Cuban and North Korean foreign ministers have expressed concern about growing tensions on the Korean peninsula, but have rejected so-called unilateral and arbitrary demands made by the US. Pyongyang is seeking support amid unprecedented pressure from Washington and the international community to cease its nuclear weapons and missile programs. It's made no secret of plans to build a missile capable of striking the US mainland, but has remained friendly with Cuba, leading some experts to believe the island nation may be able to persuade North Korea to rethink its current strategy. Pyongyang's weapons and missile project contravenes UN Security Council resolutions.
North Korea has criticized the U.S. for relisting the country as a state sponsor of terrorism. In its first reaction to President Trump's designation, a spokesman for North Korea's foreign ministry called the decision as a serious provocation. He also warned that Washington will be held accountable for all the consequences, while stressing that the designation will only strengthen the regime's resolve to retain its nuclear program. North Korea's state-run organization, the Korea-Asia-Pacific Peace Committee, released a separate statement which called for Washington to immediately withdraw its decision.
The U.S. must seriously ponder upon the fact that the anger and hatred of our military and people could lead to an undesirable retaliation.
As such a reaction comes a day after the designation, with no detailed threats mentioned, pundits forecast the regime will not immediately resume military provocations, but monitor the situation for the time being.
Ri Yong-ho's first public meeting came Wednesday morning when he arrived at the Foreign Ministry in Havana for talks with his Cuban counterpart Bruno Rodriguez. This meeting comes as both countries face deteriorating relations with the United States. The DPRK is undergoing international pressure to end its nuclear and missile programs. This week, US President Donald Trump placed the DPRK back on its list of state sponsors of terrorism.
We strongly reject the unilateral certifications and blacklists established by the government of the United States. Cuba calls for stability and peace on the Korean peninsula. We believe that a lasting political solution can be achieved only through dialogue and negotiations.
Both countries, the DPRK and Cuba, are practicing socialism under the cruel pressures and blockade of the imperialists.
Cuba, for its part, was taken off the state sponsors of terrorism list by former US President Barack Obama, but it is now facing new restrictions on trade and travel from the United States. Cuba and the DPRK have been close politically since the early days of the Cuban Revolution, establishing diplomatic relations back in 1960. And Cuba is one of the very few countries that doesn't have diplomatic relations with South Korea. There's very little trade between the two countries, and this visit appears to be more about showing solidarity in the face of outside pressure.
Well, in the United States, in the arms control community where I work, I think the consensus is that there's very little that either China or the United States has to offer North Korea at this point, and that the chance of them abandoning or giving up their nuclear weapons program is extremely small.
Do you suggest the futile attempt by Beijing and Washington would mean we have to end up accepting the DPRK as one of the nuclear-armed countries in the world?
There's a difference between recognizing that North Korea feels it needs nuclear weapons and recognizing it as a nuclear weapons state. I don't think we need to accept or recognize its status as a nuclear weapons state, but at the same time, I think we all need to realize that it's highly unlikely, after so many years of effort and so much difficulty to procure nuclear weapons, that the North Korean government is going to give them up.
Let me go back to the mission of Mr. Sung Tao. Do you think his visit to Pyongyang was actually a result of the negotiation and summit between President Xi Jinping and his American counterpart during Trump's short stay in Beijing?
Well, it would be nice to think that that's
I raise
true.
this question in the context that North Korea remains a prioritized issue on the agenda of the State Department of the U.S. government, right?
Certainly, it does. It's also on the agenda of the U.S. Congress, which is extremely concerned that President Trump may lead the North Korean government to believe that a military attack is coming. When you use language like the time for dialogue is over, what comes after dialogue that's over? And there's a grave concern about miscalculation and misunderstanding. So any channel of communication, regardless of what is said, is definitely a positive step. And it would be nice to think that President Trump and President Xi were working together behind the scenes to send the envoy to Pyongyang.
What we talk about today in the studio would come to no avail if we only gave our viewers the simple feeling that whatever we do, however we get it done, it's going to be a futile attempt. No deliverables except for the use of force. Do you think the war clouds are gathering?
I hope not. And I have just come from Tokyo, and we have a lot of relationships with colleagues in Japan and South Korea. And the consensus in both countries is that war is not an option, and that military options really aren't on the table. The United States practiced containment successfully for decades.
Wait a minute. When we look at the implications of military might and military maneuvers on the doorsteps of China, we have two kinds of shows. One is flexing military muscles as a kind of deterrence or coercive use of the military force to let DPRK know the formidable presence of the U.S. military in this region. The other is once the DPRK wants to go ahead with yet another nuclear test or missile test, and if it were to fly above Japan, like what happened previously,
Twice.
If that missile was to be intercepted, then Mr. Kim Jong-un would be infuriated. And then what do you think of the strong possibility that a preemptive strike might happen as a result of his anger?
You mean a preemptive first attack from North Korea?
Yeah.
I think the chances of that are extremely small.
But then the accidental intercepting of a missile from the DPRK might lead to dramatic escalation of the tensions. That's what
Well, if the intercept happened, it wouldn't be accidental. It would be difficult for Japan to do that. Not impossible with the technology that's available to both the United States and Japan.
But that might do the job, right?
It would more likely be the Aegis
I see.
system that would be the most appropriate choice for intercepting a missile at that altitude.
Ready to fight tonight as the North Koreans are escalating the war of words with the United States after President Trump returns the regime to the list of state sponsors of terrorism. The North Korean ruler reportedly calling the move a, quote, serious provocation equivalent to a declaration of war. Dr. Waleed Faris joining us now, Fox News national security and foreign affairs analyst. Good to see you, sir, as always. Thank you.
We're using two weapons against their own population. One is fear. They would suppress them, and we've seen that. There's evidence about that. But the second one is the feeling of isolation, meaning the North Koreans believe that their leadership is well connected worldwide, is that China is with them, as the United States is isolated. The same Soviet techniques of the during the Cold War. Now, the North Koreans starts to understand that many things have changed, that the United States is deployed, the East Asians are with the United States, and even that visit to China sends a strong message to North Korea that that regime is isolated, not the other way around.
What do you make of the fact, not what North Korea is saying, but what they're doing, or perhaps more importantly, what they're not doing? No more missile tests for the past couple of months, no nuclear tests, largely stayed silent while President Trump visited Asia.
Well, look, they read not just in terms of tweets from here and statements coming back from Pyongyang. What they read really, I mean, their military are reading the moves by the aircraft carriers, by the submarines, by the Japanese and the South Koreans mobilizing, by the Chinese not stating that at any time they will go and support the North Koreans. All that is well read. This is why they understand that it is shifting. But my real point here, that would lead us probably to another subject, is the fact that North Koreans may start to make exceptions and try to do something else. Of course, there's the incident of the soldier fleeing. To me, that's highly, highly symbolical.
Yeah, we're going to rerun that video. This video coming from the forces there on the DMZ. They're technically UN forces, but mostly South Koreans and American forces that captured that video of a North Korean soldier driving a Jeep down to the border, then running across the border. At the time, the North Koreans were shooting at their own guy who was trying to escape. What do you make of this? Is this significant? Does this show all of a sudden a little bit of a break, or is it an isolated incident?
It is isolated because it's a one incident, but it's like the drop of rain. You get the first one, really the second one will tell you that it's going to rain or not. My real question here, Leland, is how much North Koreans, including those in the army, know about what's happening worldwide, or at least in the region? How much are they connected? Because for this individual soldier to cross, I mean, he must have studied why is he going, what may happen in the future. And my sense here, that if we see more of these incidents, this is really a reminder of what has happened between East Germany and Western Germany just before the large collapse. I'm not predicting a collapse, but I'm looking at symptoms that are very, very serious at this point in time.
Flip that on its head, though, and I am always struck by a story of a defection from the north to the south told me by the former commander of U.S. forces in Korea. The person who defected and risked the same fate that this guy had of being shot at, walked through minefields, went over a frozen river. When he got to South Korea, he said, "I have come to tell the world how great the great leader is." This is back during the time of the great leader, and I don't feel he is being given his due on the world stage. Is it possible that that's what's happening here, rather than a soldier who's seen the light of how great the West is?
With a few weeks from now, when the de-intoxication will occur, we will learn more. I mean, those who are in charge of the briefings are the ones who will know more. Remember that he has been, I think he was born and raised in North Korea. He has been indoctrinated. So first thing you do when you get out of that place, there's the fear of the regime. There's the fear of the regime going after you anywhere around the world. It's really weeks from now, when he will be back to his balanced mind, that we will learn more about what are the real motives. And as I said, if there is another single incident like this one, that one is in the middle. One more incident, then we have a trend.
Well,